In the heart of Blackwood Wildlife Sanctuary lived two magnificent bobcats, Ember and Ash. They are symbols of the untamed wild, powerful, beautiful, and instinctive predators. They have every comfort a creature could desire. Plush beds, cozy hammocks, even a natural log den designed just for them. Yet when it's time to rest, they ignore all of it. Instead, they choose this battered cardboard box. Inside, two full-grown bobcats are curled up like oversized house cats, squeezed together in a space far too small for their size. Why this box? What could possibly make two apex predators choose a cramped piece of cardboard over every comfort in the world? The answer isn't just heartwarming. It's unforgettable. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The thin, silver light of a crescent moon did little to pierce the pre-dawn indigo that cloaked the Blackwood Wildlife Sanctuary. It was a liminal time, a quiet breath held between the hoot of the last owl and the first tentative chirp of a sparrow. For Ellen Croft, this was her favorite part of the day. The silence was a companion, a gentle balm on the old, worn edges of her heart. At 62, with a widow's pension and a lifetime of memories, she didn't need the night watchman job, but she needed the purpose. She needed the quiet rhythm of the rounds, the soft padding of her boots on the gravel path, and the silent, sleeping presence of the creatures she had come to love. Her flashlight beam cut a clean cone through the mist rising from the damp earth. She checked the locks on the bare enclosures, murmured a soft, "good morning" to the slumbering form of a rescued mountain lion, and finally made her way to the main gate. And that's when she saw it. Just inside the gate, stark against the dark gravel, sat a battered cardboard box. It wasn't large, the kind used for shipping a pair of boots or a small kitchen appliance. Its lid, unsecured, flapped in a breeze that Ellen couldn't even feel, a silent, desperate wave. Her brow furrowed. People left donations, yes, but usually during the day. A box left like this, in the dead of night, felt clandestine, urgent, worrisome. Her heart, a veteran of both love and loss, gave a familiar, apprehensive clench. She approached with the caution of someone who knew the world could be both wondrous and cruel. Peering over the edge, her flashlight beam fell upon two tiny, huddled forms. For a moment, they were just a knot of mottled fur. Then, two pairs of wide, impossibly large amber eyes blinked open, luminous in the sudden light. They were bobcat kittens, no more than 4 weeks old, their ears still tufted with the downy fur of infancy. They let out a series of pitiful, mewing cries, a sound too small and fragile for the vast, dark world they found themselves in. Their fur was matted with something sticky, and their tiny bodies trembled, not just from the morning chill, but from a deep-seated weakness. As one of them let out another desperate cry, a rattling sound followed every desperate, tiny inhale. Ellen's breath caught in her throat. That was the sound of pneumonia, a death knell for a creature so young. All protocol, all thoughts of procedure, vanished. There was only the primal human instinct to protect, to nurture. "Oh, you poor, poor things," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She shrugged off her worn, flannel-lined jacket. With hands made gentle by years of tending to wounded things, both animal and human, she carefully scooped them up. They were weightless, a mere handful of bone and fur and desperate life. She tucked them inside her jacket, against the warmth of her own body, murmuring soft, meaningless reassurances. "It's okay now. You're safe." I've got you." Behind her, as she turned and hurried toward the sanctuary's clinic, the empty cardboard box toppled onto its side, forgotten on the gravel, its purpose seemingly fulfilled. But for the two shivering lives nestled against Ellen's heart, the story of that box had only just begun. Dr. Mark Miller was already at the clinic, a man whose weary eyes had seen more than their fair share of animal suffering. He was pouring his first coffee of the day when Ellen burst in, her face etched with urgency. "Mark, I need you. At the gate. 2 of them, Bobcats." He didn't need any more explanation. He set his mug down and followed her to the examination room. Ellen gently laid the kittens on the cool, stainless steel table under the unforgiving glare of the medical lamp. They looked even more wretched now. 2 scraps of life against the sterile metal. Mark's examination was swift and efficient, his hands moving with a practiced gentleness. "Dehydration severe. Malnutrition is obvious. This little one," he said, gesturing to the male whose breath hitched and rattled, "has a nasty respiratory infection. It's advanced." He looked up at Ellen, his expression grim. "I'll be honest with you, Ellen. Their chances aren't great, especially his." Ellen's jaw tightened. She had lost her husband, a park ranger named Tom, to a sudden heart attack on a trail he'd walked 1,000 times. She knew loss. She knew the hollow ache of a world suddenly emptied of a vital presence. She looked at the tiny, struggling kitten and saw not just an animal, but a flicker of life that deserved to fight. "We have to try, Mark. We have to give them everything we've got." Mark saw the resolve in her eyes, the same look he saw in his own reflection every morning. "Of course we do," he said, a little softer. "Let's get to work. We'll call them Ember and Ash." The next 72 hours blurred into a continuous cycle of care. Mark administered subcutaneous fluids to combat the dehydration and started a course of powerful antibiotics. Feeding them was a painstaking process. Their mother's milk would have been a complex cocktail of fats and proteins. The best they could offer was a specialized kitten formula, delivered drop by drop from a tiny syringe into their unwilling mouths. They were housed in an incubator, a sterile glass box with a heat lamp that cast a warm, life-sustaining glow. They had soft blankets and a fleecy bed, but they were restless and agitated, constantly crying, their tiny bodies writhing. They seemed to be searching for something, nuzzling blindly into the corners of the incubator. On the second night, Ash took a turn for the worse. His breathing grew shallow, the rattling in his chest more pronounced. He refused the syringe, his tiny head turning away weakly. Mark had done all he could medically. "It's up to him now," he told Ellen, his voice heavy. "Sometimes the will to live just isn't enough." Ellen refused to accept it. While the rest of the sanctuary slept, she pulled a chair up to the incubator. She watched Ash's tiny flank barely rise and fall. An idea, born of desperation and a flash of memory, took hold. The box, the battered, forgotten box they had arrived in. She slipped out of the clinic and walked back to the front gate. There it was, lying on its side, dewy and forlorn. It seemed like a ridiculous notion, bringing a dirty piece of cardboard into a sterile environment. But her instincts, honed by a lifetime of quiet observation, screamed at her. She picked it up and brought it back to the clinic. She carefully cut down one of the sides to make it easier for them to get in and out, then placed the old carton inside the incubator. The change was immediate and profound. Ember, the slightly stronger female, crawled into it at once. She sniffed the corrugated walls, her tiny nose twitching. Then she began to knead the flattened bottom with her paws, a motion of pure instinctive comfort. Ash, who had been listless, stirred. He smelled the familiar scent, a faint lingering trace of his mother, of the pine needles from their lost den, of the human who had first tried to save them. He dragged his frail body over the low wall and collapsed next to his sister. The rattling in his chest seemed to soften, replaced by a barely audible, hesitant purr. Ellen sat there all night watching them. Sometime before dawn, Ash's breathing deepened, becoming more regular. He even took a few drops of formula from the syringe she offered. A single tear traced a path down Ellen's cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of profound, overwhelming relief. The box wasn't just a box. It was a lifeline. It was their first memory of safety after chaos, and in its humble, worn-out confines, they had found the will to fight. In the weeks that followed, a miracle unfolded in the sanctuary's nursery. Under the constant glow of the heat lamp and Ellen's devoted care, Ember and Ash began to thrive. Ash's respiratory infection cleared, his rattling breaths replaced by the robust purr of a healthy, growing cat. Their matted fur gave way to a thick, soft coat, their spots darkening into the beautiful rosette patterns of their breed. They were moved from the incubator to a larger nursery enclosure, a space designed to mimic a natural environment with small logs to climb, soft grass, and a shallow pool of water. Yet, amidst all these new, exciting things, their devotion to the cardboard box remained absolute. The sanctuary staff, a mix of seasoned biologists and enthusiastic young volunteers, provided them with an array of comfortable sleeping options. They brought in plush, fleece-lined beds, a small woven hammock, even a hollowed-out log that would have been a perfect natural den. The kittens would sniff these new offerings with polite curiosity, perhaps bat at a dangling tassel or even take a brief nap on a soft pillow. But when true, deep sleep called to them, they would invariably abandon the luxury and scramble back to their tattered, increasingly cramped cardboard box. They would squeeze inside, a tangle of paws and tails, their bodies pressed against the familiar corrugated walls. They'd rub their cheeks against the frayed corners, marking it not with the territorial spray of a wild cat, an instinct they had yet to develop, but with the scent of their own contentment, an act of pure love. It became a running joke, a source of gentle amusement among the team. The box kittens, they were affectionately called. Volunteers would come just to watch the ritual. Two young bobcats, a picture of burgeoning wildness, playing and pouncing with ferocious glee, only to retreat to the ridiculous safety of their cardboard fort when they were tired. Ellen, however, saw more than just an amusing quirk. She saw a mystery, a behavioral puzzle that spoke of a past they couldn't share. She spent hours simply observing them, a notebook in her lap. She noted how their purrs were always loudest, a deep, rumbling thrum, when they were nestled together in the box. She watched as Ash, the more reserved of the two, would often just sit in the box, his amber eyes watching the world from its safety like a king on a cardboard throne. Ember, bolder and more adventurous, used it as a base of operations, launching mock attacks on passing leaves or Ellen's boots before retreating to its familiar walls. As they grew from kittens into adolescents, their wild instincts began to sharpen. Their playful pounces became more practiced, their leaps higher and more agile. Their spots deepened from a soft brown to a rich, dramatic russet, and their whiskers, long and sensitive, quivered with an insatiable curiosity about the world beyond their enclosure. They were becoming the majestic predators they were born to be. The box, however, did not grow with them. By the time they were 6 months old and nearing their full size, their shared love for their first home became a comical, almost poignant spectacle. They would attempt to squeeze inside together, a maneuver that required contortions worthy of a circus act. One paw would dangle out here, a haunch would bulge over the side there. They'd jostle and grumble, shifting and turning until they found a position, however awkward, that allowed them both to be in contact with the worn-out cardboard. They looked utterly absurd and completely content. One crisp autumn afternoon, Ellen stood watching them, a bittersweet smile playing on her lips. These magnificent creatures, who should have been learning to hunt in a sprawling forest, who could have roamed miles of wilderness if fate had been kinder, were still, at heart, children clinging to their security blanket. The sight filled her with a fierce, protective love, but also a burning need to understand. That evening, she examined the box more closely than ever before. It was falling apart, held together in places by strips of duct tape the staff had applied. The cardboard was soft and pulpy from months of kneading paws and damp fur. She ran her fingers over the outside, feeling for any identifying marks. Most of it was blank, but on the bottom, partially obscured by dirt and a dark, unidentifiable stain, was the ghost of a shipping label. Her heart quickened. She carefully carried the box to the clinic's brighter lights, and using a damp cloth and a magnifying glass, she painstakingly cleaned the area. Most of the ink had been worn away, but she could just make out a few crucial fragments. A faded logo for Ridgeback Outfitters, and below it, the name of a town, Cedar Creek, Colorado. Cedar Creek. It was a small town, she knew, a few hours' drive away, nestled on the edge of the Pike National Forest. A place where the wild still pressed in on the edges of civilization. A plan began to form in her mind, a conviction so strong it felt like an obligation. The answer to the kitten's past, the key to their strange, unshakable attachment, lay in that town, with that outfitter. She had to go. This wasn't just about satisfying her own curiosity anymore. It was about honoring the unspoken story of Ember and Ash. It was about finding the missing piece of their history so that she could truly, completely make them whole. She felt a kinship with them. She too had been left alone, her world shattered. And just as they clung to the box, she clung to the sanctuary, both of them finding a way to piece their lives back together in the aftermath of tragedy. The journey to Cedar Creek, she realized, was as much for her as it was for them. Ellen presented her plan to the sanctuary director, a practical woman named Sarah who trusted Ellen's instincts implicitly. "Take the sanctuary's truck," Sarah said without hesitation. "Find out what you can. Those cats deserve to have their story known." The drive to Cedar Creek was a journey through a changing landscape, from the rolling plains surrounding the sanctuary to the rugged foothills of the Rocky Mountains. The air grew thinner, crisper, scented with pine and the promise of wilderness. Cedar Creek itself was little more than a main street, a collection of stone and timber buildings that looked like they had stood against the harsh Colorado winters for 100 years. Ellen parked the truck and began her quiet investigation. Her first stop was the post office. The postmaster, a man with a weathered face and friendly eyes, listened patiently as Ellen explained her quest, showing him a photo she'd taken of the faded Ridgeback Outfitters logo. "Oh, sure, I remember Ridgeback," the man said, leaning on the counter. "Run by old George Hemlock. Best fly-tying gear and hiking boots you could find. Had to close up shop a couple of years back, though. Health wasn't what it used to be." He gave her directions to George's small cabin on the edge of town, adding, "He's a quiet fella. Keeps to himself mostly since his wife passed. Ellen's heart gave a sympathetic pang. She thanked the postmaster and drove down a winding dirt road, the trees pressing in on either side. George Hemlock's cabin was small and tidy, with a plume of smoke curling from its stone chimney. A neatly stacked woodpile stood against one wall. She took a deep breath, clutching the photos of Ember and Ash in her hand like a talisman, and knocked on the solid oak door. The man who answered was tall and stooped, his face a roadmap of long years spent under the sun and sky. His eyes, a pale, clear blue, were wary, the eyes of a man accustomed to solitude. "Mr. Hemlock?" Ellen began, her voice gentle. "My name is Ellen Croft. I work at the Blackwood Wildlife Sanctuary. I know this is an unusual request, but I was hoping to talk to you about something that happened a while back. It's about a box from your old store." George's expression didn't change. "My store's been closed for years," he said, his voice raspy. "I know," Ellen said, taking a step forward and holding out the photos. "It's about who was in the box." George glanced down at the photos. He saw the two Bobcats, now sleek and healthy, looking regal and wild. Then his eyes fell on the third photo Ellen held, a picture of the two of them crammed into their tattered cardboard box. His breath hitched. The wary shield in his eyes crumbled, replaced by a wave of raw, unguarded emotion. His shoulders slumped, and he leaned against the doorframe as if his legs could no longer support him. "They made it," he whispered, his voice cracking. "The little fella. His breathing was so bad, I didn't think he'd make it through the drive." Tears welled in the old man's eyes. He motioned for Ellen to come inside. The cabin was simple and clean, smelling of wood smoke and old books. He sank into a worn armchair by the fireplace and stared into the flames, his hands trembling slightly. And then, the story poured out of him. "Their mother," he began, his voice thick with memory. "She was a beautiful thing. Made her den in a rocky outcrop just up the ridge behind my place. I'd watch her sometimes, through my binoculars. Saw her with the kits just after they were born. I left her alone, of course. She was wild. It was her home, not mine." His face darkened. "Then the poachers came through, setting illegal snares for fox, but those things, they don't care what they catch." He paused, swallowing hard. "I found her one morning. The snare had... It was bad. She was still alive, but there was nothing to be done. I had to end her suffering." He looked at Ellen, his eyes pleading for understanding. "It was the only kind thing to do. I knew the kits were alone. I waited a day, hoping she was just out hunting, but she never came back. I could hear them crying. I couldn't just leave them there to starve." He had brought them back to his shed, a decision that weighed heavily on him. He knew it was illegal to possess wildlife. He placed them in the first thing he could find, an old shipping box from the last of his store's stock. He tried to care for them, feeding them cow's milk with an eyedropper, knowing it was wrong but not knowing what else to do. He kept them warm with an old trouble light. "The little male, he was so weak," George continued, his gaze distant. "He was fading. I knew I was in over my head. I'm too old for this, and my heart..." He patted his chest. "It isn't what it used to be. I was scared if I called Fish and Wildlife, they'd just put them down. They were too young to have a fear of people." So, with a heavy heart, he had made a desperate choice. He'd heard of the Blackwood Sanctuary, a place that gave animals a real chance. In the middle of the night, he put the box with the 2 kittens in his old truck and drove for 3 hours. He left them at the gate, saying a silent prayer that someone good would find them. "I drove away feeling like the worst coward on earth," he confessed, his voice breaking. "Abandoning them like that. I've thought about them every single day since, wondering if they were found, wondering if they survived." Ellen was speechless, her own tears now flowing freely. The mystery was solved, and the truth was more poignant than anything she could have imagined. The box wasn't just a container. It was the site of their first rescue. Its scent, its very texture, was interwoven with the memory of the first human kindness they had ever known. A kindness that followed the deepest trauma of their lives. Their strange behavior wasn't a quirk. It was a tribute. It was the only way they knew how to remember the man who had saved them. "George," Ellen said, her voice filled with a warmth that reached across the space between them. "You didn't abandon them. You saved their lives. You are the reason they are alive today. You have to come and see them." The final pieces of the puzzle fell into place back at Blackwood. When Ellen recounted George's story to the sanctuary staff, a hush fell over the room. The amusing story of the box kittens was transformed into a legend of love, loss, and rescue. But the practical problem remained. Ember and Ash were now far too large for their disintegrating cardboard sanctuary. Watching them struggle to fit inside was no longer just comical. It felt disrespectful to the memory it represented. That's when Ellen had her second brilliant idea. She called one of the sanctuary's most dedicated volunteers, a retired woodworker named Dave. She sketched out a plan, not just for a box, but for a monument. It would be a reinforced cedar box, twice the size of the original, with tall sides for security and a wide opening. But it needed one more thing. On her next call with George, who had hesitantly agreed to visit, she made a strange request. "George," she asked, "do you happen to have an old flannel shirt? One you've worn a lot that you wouldn't mind parting with?" A week later, the day of the great unveiling arrived. Dave had outdone himself. The new box was a masterpiece of simple, loving craftsmanship. It smelled wonderfully of fresh cedar. Before placing it in the enclosure, Ellen carefully cut the old, soft flannel shirt George had sent her and used it to line the bottom, creating a soft, scented bed. George arrived at the sanctuary, his old hands fidgeting nervously. He looked smaller here, away from his mountain cabin, a little lost amidst the bustle of the sanctuary. Ellen led him to the Bobcat enclosure, his steps slow and hesitant. The staff carefully removed the old, tattered box and placed the new, beautiful one in its place. Ember and Ash, disturbed by the change, paced nervously at the far end of their habitat. They eyed the new object with deep suspicion. "Go on," Ellen whispered to George. "Talk to them." George stepped closer to the chain-link fence. He cleared his throat, his voice raspy with emotion. "Hey there, little ones," he said softly. "Hey there, remember me?" At the sound of his voice, a voice they hadn't heard in nearly a year but was imprinted on their souls, both Bobcats froze. Their heads shot up, ears swiveling to pinpoint the source. They stared directly at George. Ash, always the more cautious one, took a tentative step forward, his amber eyes wide with a dawning recognition. It was Ember, ever the trailblazer, who broke the spell. She approached the new box with caution, sniffing its cedar walls. Then she hopped inside. Her nose twitched as she took in the familiar, comforting scent of George's flannel shirt. She sank down onto the soft fabric, and a deep, rumbling purr, the loudest Ellen had ever heard from her, echoed through the enclosure. A moment later, Ash followed, curling up beside his sister. They nudged each other, then settled into a perfect knot of contentment, finally at home in a space big enough to hold both them and the memory they cherished. George stood at the fence, tears streaming unchecked down his weathered cheeks. This time, they were not tears of regret, but of pure, unadulterated joy. He had not failed them. They remembered. Ellen stood beside him, placing a gentle, comforting hand on his arm. A circle had been completed. A wound had been healed. In that moment, two lonely souls, a man who had lost his wife and a woman who had lost her husband, found a shared purpose and the beginning of a new friendship, united by their love for two wild creatures. From that day on, Ember and Ash slept only in their new custom-built box. It was grand and sturdy, a fitting home for two majestic bobcats. But to them, it was and would always be the cardboard box, a symbol of safety, a scent of salvation, and a permanent, heartwarming testament to the enduring, unbreakable bond that can form between the wild and the human heart.